As a change to the previous theme of this channel, I've recently gained an interest in the location of the Battle of Hastings, an enduring archaeological mystery near where I live. Despite the location of the official claim to the site as Battle Abbey, which is heavily supported by the documentary evidence, the subject is still contentious because no evidence of the battle has been found at the site, despite the recentish excavations by Time Team. You would expect a few arrowheads at least. This led me to wonder, what other evidence could we find of the battle site, which made me think of the aftermath. So you are William, you have won the battle, but you have thousands of dead bodies on your hands, and you don't have time for that, because you have a country to continue conquering. You certainly aren't going to spend the time digging an individual grave for everyone. That would take forever. William needs a mass grave, something large enough that it would appear on LiDAR. So I thought, yeah, he would dig a big hole, pile all the bodies in, then cover it over with the earth from the hole. That sounds a lot more efficient than digging lots of individual graves. Over time, the bodies would decompose, leading to a collapse in the centre of the mass grave due to the greater depth of decomposing bodies, leaving a slump in the centre with a raised rim around the outside. So I went looking for something like that on LiDAR. I found something. Not quite as described, but something that actually makes more sense when you think about it. So let's take this theory. Let's call it my big hole theory. They remove the soil from the hole, they pile the bodies in the hole, they cover it in with the soil from the hole. They have moved that soil twice. There is actually a more efficient way. Instead of digging a hole for the bodies, pile them up on the level ground. Dig a hole to the side and cover the bodies using the soil from that hole. William has only had to move that soil once, a lot more efficient, and off he goes to conquer the rest of England. This would have slumped in a similar way, though with a slightly different profile. So where did I find a feature like this? What is this mysterious site I'm talking about, where such an obvious feature has gone unnoticed by the archaeological community? It's Battle Abbey! I bet you didn't expect that. You were expecting somewhere in the middle of nowhere, weren't you? At this point you are probably also thinking, that's ridiculous. How could they have missed a feature like that at the official battle site? Well, let's have a look at it. The feature is just to the south of Battle Abbey and on the official battle site. It's hidden in woodland and doesn't appear on most maps. It has been noticed before, but I believe it has been misinterpreted. Let's strip away all of the trees and see what it looks like on the LiDAR. Here it is, sitting on a slope leading down into the valley. That's very much not a natural feature. Despite that, it doesn't appear on the historic environment record. Before we go through the various interpretations of this earthwork, let's look at it in a bit more detail. This is a complex feature, and this is my interpretation of it. The areas we are most interested in are the rims in green and the slumps in red, which are the features we are looking for in the explanation already given. These are arranged in a broadly linear pattern, parallel to the cut to the north. The cut is now partially occupied by a series of ponds, which we'll examine shortly, and has probably gone through some landscaping since the original cut. Two more modern features in this complex are a mound in yellow, which overlays slumped areas, and I think is a viewing platform built when the abbey was a private residence, probably using material from maintaining the ponds. The orange feature looks like a trackway for getting up onto the feature, cutting through a part of the rim. This may have been intended as access to the modern viewing platform. Here is an example profile across the feature. The current ground level is the red line, and a possible original slope is the blue line. As you can see, the feature is higher than the natural slope on the downslope side than the upslope side. My explanation for this is the bodies liquefied in decomposition flowing down the slope within the earthwork. Now on to alternative explanations for the earthwork. The first I haven't seen mentioned elsewhere, but it's something that I came up with and later discounted. As it's a semi-plausible theory, I thought I would deal with it now. The theory is the earthwork is spoil from digging out the ponds, represented by the cut on the north side. There are a number of problems with this. There is far too much material in the earthwork to be accounted for by the cut to the north. The ponds are 2 to 4 metres deep. The earthwork is much deeper, which would make sense if it were mostly made of corpses. It could be argued that successive waves of colluvium made its way downhill, and repeated clearing out of the ponds could produce that volume, but that's a bit of a stretch. The form of the earthwork is very complex, and creating that form would have required additional unnecessary work over a simple spoil heap. It's not clear if the cut to the west of the pond at A on the map was ever converted into ponds. The artificial revetments visible to the east are missing to the west, and if there were ponds here, they would have drained to the west, and there is less evidence for that than to the east. Lastly, this is a very odd spot for a set of ponds. A much better location would be in the valley below, and we do have genuine medieval ponds at C on the map, with D being a 19th century addition. The ponds at B are also probably later additions to create a waterfall from the water in pond A. What does work is if the cut was made from the medieval period and was partially reworked as a series of ponds when Battle Abbey was in private hands. There is another theory that is quoted most often in various books on the Battle of Hastings that do mention this feature, or at least the raised hillock feature without a slump. It is described as a hillock between the main battle site and the swampy area to the south, where the Normans made a stand against the attacking English. They are probably referring to the mound at A on the map, discounting the rest of the earthwork. This theory would require that this purely artificial feature were present before the battle, but it is not clear what this feature could be identified as if it predated the battle. A better candidate for this narrative of a last stand is the earthwork at B, which looks at least partly natural, though maybe partly, though not wholly, formed of a positive lynchet. Another theory, from nothing less than the official English Heritage Guidebook for Battle Abbey, is that this feature has something to do with resource extraction in the 18th century. This didn't sit right with me for a number of reasons, but the guide didn't say where that information came from. If it were true, that would be the end of my theory, so I had to find the origin. I eventually found it in a battlefield earthwork survey published by English Heritage in 2002. This document, which is available online, analyses the earthworks across the battlefield. The feature we are looking at receives little attention as it is grown over, so appears as a blank space on the earthwork map. Nevertheless, part of the western end was visible to the surveyor. As you can see from the highlighted section, the interpretation of quarrying is a hypothesis based on the visual inspection of part of the feature. It is not an interpretation based on historical record. Now that we have that information, I can explain why I disagree with resource extraction as an interpretation. First, a look at the geology. The guidebook says the feature is a stone quarry, where the original earthwork survey says quarry. That's a natural assumption to make, as the word quarry in English specifically relates to stone. The extraction of softer materials happens in a pit rather than a quarry. As you can see from the geology map overlay on top of the LiDAR, the geology is Wadhurst clay, so not a quarry as suggested. Wadhurst clay contains an underlying mudstone, not any use as a building stone, which weathers to clay near the surface. It does also contain siderite in places, an iron ore that was the basis of the Wealden iron industry. But what we have here looks nothing like extraction relating to ironworking. Clay extraction is a possibility here, but there are other problems with that. A natural extraction pit is visible to the west of our feature, so let's compare the two in more detail. There are two options for extraction on our feature. The English Heritage Earthwork Survey looked at the western end of our feature and suggested that the slump was an extraction pit. The two problems with that are that the feature as a whole is artificial, so they would have been digging into an artificial feature. The slump is also very shallow and gently undulating. You might expect that if the feature had been ploughed, but this has definitely not been ploughed. Extraction pits are a lot deeper and sharper. The second option is that the cut on the north side is the extraction pit, but there are problems with that too. Let's look at the actual extraction pit to the west and compare it with our feature. The pit to the left is roughly round or oval, which is the most common form for these things. The cut to the north of our feature is a long linear, which is not a form I have seen before. I've highlighted the cuts in red and the associated mounds in green. The mounds next to the extraction pit to the west, which represents the topsoil taken off before extraction of the underlying geology, is both a simple mound and smaller than the pit, which is what you would expect when you're taking something out. Our mound feature to the east is an unnecessarily complex form and is much larger than the pits, which is the opposite of what you would expect for extraction. So comparing a real extraction pit to the west with the feature we are looking at, I'm pretty sure we are not seeing the result of extraction here. What are we left with? The hypothesis is that this feature, at least in part, represents a mass grave of the fallen soldiers from the battle. This video is not proof of that, but hopefully shows that it is at least a reasonable hypothesis that is worth further investigation. It's a very testable hypothesis. A 1 meter test pit in the centre of one of the slumps down to the natural would answer that question very quickly. That would be up to English Heritage. So what do you think? Does this hypothesis have legs? Leave me a comment if you can think of another explanation. Before I go, I would like to give you a second hypothesis, an explanation for why this feature is where it is and why it is the shape it is. The feature is elongated, stretching across the battlefield. What else can you think of that is elongated and stretches across a battlefield? It's a battle line. Harold's battle line was static throughout much of the battle, so if this were the line that Harold's army was holding at the start of the battle, then there would have been a lot of arrows heading their way, and this would have been the greatest concentration of bodies on the battlefield. It would have been the most efficient place for a mass grave, as this would be where most of the bodies already were, so less bodies to move. It does seem a strange place for a battle line though. Why not further up the hill? There are two benefits I can see. One is that they would have been able to attack William's army as soon as it crossed the boggy ground to the south, preventing them from forming up after the crossing. The second is the side of the western flank would have been protected from cavalry by the natural feature to the west of it. That's it for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below.